and welcome to the N10008 Emotional Support Study Group / podcast show. I'm your friendly internet tutorial assistant, Tech Lady Tay Tay. Before we begin, I suppose we should address the elephant in the room. Well, you're probably wondering what the heck is going on with this emotional support group thingy. Well, there's a few things going on. One, we are studying for the Network Plus Certification exam number N10008, administered by the Computing Technology Industry Association, or CompTIA. And let me tell you, this is not an easy test to prep for. It is rough out in these N10008 streets. And this is a safe space where we get to review our exam materials very, very slowly, or as slowly as we can, which is essentially me reading my notes and giving strategies on how to help with the test. Also, speaking of strategies, when I took the test back in January and failed it, my test anxiety flared up something awful, which I imagine happened to other people. So I like to give test-taking tips that may help. We're going to go right into it. Today's term of the week is OSI Model, or the Open Systems Interconnection, which was started in 1977 by the ISO, or the International Standards Organization. Now, the OSI model is made up of 7 layers and arranged vertically in what is called a stack. From the bottom to the top, it consists of the physical layer, the data link layer, the network layer, the transport layer, the session layer, the presentation layer, and the application layer. Now stay tuned, because in subsequent episodes we're going to go over every layer of the OSI model, but today we're only doing an overview. Now, it's important to note that the OSI model is a concept, meaning it's a standardized way for us to check connectivity between devices, applications, and protocols. It's not anything you can touch. It's not tangible. You can't walk into its office. You can't really order it on Amazon. No, it's just something to remember or think about. Now, troubleshooting is what helped me really get what was going on with the OSI model. So keep in mind that it's great for troubleshooting, whether you're in a networking center in Omaha, Los Angeles, or Nutbush, Tennessee. You can use the OSI model as a method of making sure that your devices are in working order, or those things are thangin'. So when I say that you can use the OSI model to troubleshoot, this is what I mean, and I'm going to go into detail in this overview. So we have layer 1, that's the physical layer, and that layer includes cables, devices, and peripherals. So is your mouse or a keyboard plugged in? If you have a Bluetooth device, is it turned on? That happens a lot. It happens to me all the time. So this is a layer 1 issue. You want to make sure everything is turned on and plugged in. Layer 2 is the data link layer. That's the layer responsible for framing data for transmission, and it also provides a reliable link between 2 directly connected nodes. Now, when framing data for transmission, the data link layer, they're going to check your data for errors that may have been formed at the physical layer. We're not going to go over that today, though. Again, this is an overview. Keep in mind that the data link layer is subdivided into 2 sub-layers. We have the media access control layer. That's the lower subdivided layer, and it's responsible for the transmission of data that was sent from the physical layer. It is also at this layer where frames are checked for errors, what I was just talking about. The LLC layer, or the logical link layer, is the upper subdivided layer, and that's where your CPU is consumed for data processing. Some data link layer troubleshooting problems to consider is your MAC address. Is your MAC address okay? What's going on with it? If you need to check your MAC address, consider running an ARP-A command. You might want to write that one down. Another thing that tripped me up and also operates at the data link layer is spanning tree protocol. Now, layer 3 is the network layer, and that layer is responsible for transporting data between networks through routing. That said, routers operate at the network layer of the OSI model, and protocols that corresponds to this layer includes IP protocols and ICMP protocols. So ICMP is often referred to as the text messaging of the network. So at this layer, if you're having trouble, maybe, say for instance, connecting to a router, you can use an ICMP protocol to say, hey, can you hear me now? Are you there? Hello, God, it's me, Margaret. Okay, I'm done. Not really, though. Layer 4, that's the transport layer. And it's responsible for delivering data from host to host along the paths created by the network layer. TCP and UDP functions at this transport layer. So a good thing to check when troubleshooting at the transport layer are your ports. Are ports 80 or 443 open? Layer 5, that's the session layer. And that layer establishes sessions or defines conversations between applications. This includes querying your DNS server. So if you need to query your DNS server, you can use the NSLookup command. Layer 6, that's the presentation layer, and that's the layer that most of us has had a run-in with. So let's say, for instance, you're working on a garage band project, and you say to yourself, I'm done with this project. I want to share it with someone, but you can't just pick up your computer and bring it to that person. You probably wouldn't want to. So you have to send it to them in a format that they can read, such as WAV file, MP3 file, AAC file, some type of audio file that the other person can click on and play, right? Well, it's going to be the presentation layer that's going to take care of it, because the presentation layer takes care of compression, decompression, encryption, and de-encryption. I want you to keep the presentation layer in mind, because that's what you're going to be basically working with, or that's a good thing to troubleshoot if you ever, say for instance, find yourself in a position where you have to encrypt a page to accept debit cards for someone's website, say for instance. Encryption takes place of that, and we're going to actually be talking about encryption a lot in my bonus episodes for my podcast. And it's the same podcast series, but I call this the incident report. That's my bonus episode. So keep this presentation layer / encryption idea in the back of your head. We're going to talk a lot about that in future episodes. Now, layer 7 is the application layer. At this layer, the user can see most of what they're doing, or see the protocol. So protocols at this layer includes HTTP or HTTPS, FTP, and more. Now, if you have connectivity at the application layer, is to surf a web page or send an email to verify connectivity. You can do that. And if you get that timeout issue or page cannot be loaded, then you have a problem. Just saying. I'll make sure that all references made in this session are linked on my blog, SeanLimas.wordpress.com. And if you're feeling froggy, you can always use practice labs to help guide you through the OSI model troubleshooting process. I personally got a subscription to practice labs once I purchased a book on Amazon, and I'll post the link to the book as well and the show report notes. Now, we've reached the test strategy portion of the show, and this is where I drop gems of truth about what I learned about my own testing anxiety and what could possibly help you if you're in the same position. In today's test anxiety strategy, we talk about making sure you are well accommodated for. If you're of a certain age, then you probably remember that back in the 80s, Americans with disabilities were going so hard for their rights, and rightfully so. They were crawling the Capitol steps. I mean, they were not playing. They were having protests. And the reality is that if you live in America, then you know that Americans with disabilities have just really started getting rights. And but because of their activism, people with test anxiety may have avenues for help. Now, according to the Journal of Physician Assistant Education, the Americans with Disability Act, or ADA, it was enacted in 1990, and a portion of it requires institutions of higher learning to abide by the regulations set forth governing the provision of accommodations for students with disabilities. That means that institutions of higher learning have to be there for people with disabilities. I must also note that in the same journal it said that test anxiety in and of itself is not considered a learning disability under ADA. However, some schools have seen, I'd imagine, students with test anxiety and they stepped up to the plate. One thing you can do is go to the testing office if you've scheduled your exam at a testing center, because you never know. They might have something there for you. I went to a testing center at Cuyahoga Community College, and they actually had a lot of things for me. Noise canceling headphones. They put me in an isolated area. They had basically everything within my vicinity, with the exception of the restroom and the water fountain. But anything that I needed, they made sure I was taken care of. And I must have looked nervous because the proctor kept reassuring me that she was just around the corner if I needed anything. That made me feel a little better. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because this is a good time to advocate for yourself. You deserve to be accommodated for. Well, that is my time. Thanks so much for hanging out with me. I hope you've gained something valuable from today's notes. And as my mama says when she exits some spaces, if you can't be good, be bad. But whatever you be good at it. Follow me on social, Twitter and IG, TechLadyTayTay, all one word. And of course, you can follow my blog, SeanLimas.wordpress.com. And one day, I'm going to buy a .com. Just not today. Have a good one.